Well, hello, I'm Janet Morena, Executive Director of Priests for Life. Welcome to Just Ask Janet. Well, many of you might have known someone, maybe you know someone in your own family who's had an abortion, a friend, a parent. There's all kinds of circumstances out there. Well, in today's program, we're going to hear a story from a woman who did have an abortion, but then how she herself took that experience and turned it around to reach out and help so many other people to find healing and peace after their abortion. So, welcome to the program today, my dear friend, Theresa Bonapartis. Teresa, welcome to the program.
Hi, Janet. Great to see you. Good
Great
to
to see
be
you
here.
too.
Always ready to share this message, right?
Exactly, exactly. So, of course, Teresa, some people maybe don't know the little known fact that you did work for Priest for Life with Father Pavone for a few years when our office was up in Portchester, New
There was
York. So,
only there was only four of us.
there were only
Right?
4 people who worked for Priest for Life back then. So,
That's
we have certainly, with the Lord's grace, grown so much.
thank
But
God.
take us back to your own abortion experience and tell everyone the circumstances that surrounded your own abortion.
Okay, well, I was a teenager and I grew up in the 1960s and, the Woodstock generation, the whole bit there. And I just always remember feeling like there was something wrong with me because I wasn't sexually active. And I decided to sleep with someone that I was seeing and I became pregnant. And I grew up in an Italian American family, pretty strict. My dad was pretty strict. And so, like many teenagers, I was afraid to tell him or them about my abortion. And one of the things I think that really, like in retrospect, when I think about it all the time, I really was never afraid of the abortion option because we were Catholic. We went to church every Sunday. I didn't really know my faith on a personal level, but I really didn't think that abortion would ever be an option. So it was really nothing that really entered my mind. And what ended up happening, I hid it from my parents for 4 months. I told the father of the baby. He told me that he would marry me. And so I just kept postponing. You could wear those peasant shirts. It was very easy to hide the pregnancy. And when I finally told my father, I got a very different reaction than I thought that I would get. He got up out of his chair. He told me to get out of his house and to forget that I was his daughter, and he was going to forget that I was his daughter. And I just remember just feeling so totally shocked, like I couldn't even believe it was happening. And I left the house that day and ended up staying with a friend at her parents' house for a while. And you hear many women once they do find healing, like really talking about the isolation, like you're really cut off. David Reardon from the Elliott Institute, who does post abortion research, he always talks about how women are most often aborted before they ever step foot into an abortion clinic themselves. So I think I definitely felt like that. I started fighting with the baby's father. I told him to leave me alone. And he did. He was a teenager too. He didn't know what to do. And so I didn't have that relationship anymore. And my father started having my sister call me to tell me that he wanted me to have an abortion. And I kept saying, no, I don't want an abortion. I'm not going to have an abortion. And he kept pushing it, pushing it, pushing it through her. Every day she would call me up and say, you have no job, no money, no place to live. What are you going to do? How are you going to take care of this kid? And so what ended up happening after a period of time is I caved into the pressure. I didn't have an abortion because it was a free choice. I had an abortion because I felt like I had no choice. And because I was in my 4th month of pregnancy, my abortion was in a hospital. I had a saline abortion. I still, to this day, don't remember how I got to the hospital. I was on the maternity ward in a room there. No one ever told me the development of my baby. Nobody told me anything that was going to happen to me or what the abortion procedure, what it was going to be like. I knew nothing. And I just remember the doctor walking into the room, and I remember thinking that he looked sadistic. I just really totally remember that in my head, like looking at him and feeling like he was sadistic. And he came in and he injected me with a saline solution. And again, I had no idea what that was or what I was in for. And what it does is it burns the baby to death and it sends you into labor. And like I can remember my son thrashing around inside of me. Only at that time I didn't know what it was. And I went into labor for many, many hours, and I ended up giving birth to a dead baby boy. And to this day, I still can see him in my mind's eye. And I remember being in that hospital room and really thinking, how is this possible? Like, I couldn't believe that it was legal, that I was in a regular hospital, this was going on. Like, I couldn't even wrap my head around that. And I just remember instantly hating myself and wanting to pick him up and put him back inside of me, which obviously I couldn't do. And then I remember thinking how I wanted to jump out the window of the hospital, but I didn't have the courage to do that. And I rang for the nurse, and she came into the room, and she had this big plastic jar, and across the front of it was marked 3A. And she picked up my son, and she put him in the jar, and she walked out of the room. And all I could really say is that my life just changed dramatically from them. Again, I hated myself. I totally, there was just such an unbelief. There still is an unbelief, if you want to know the truth. I mean, you would think after all these years that there wouldn't be, but there's just such a like a shock still that we allow these abortions to go on, and the horrific act of abortion, and it's as if it's not going on, or people don't pay attention to it. It's funny because, like, with this new Texas law, I can't remember his name, sorry, but one of the senators was talking about the Texas law. Obviously, he was against it, and he said something about how horrifying it is that this Texas law was in place and how it was terrifying to them. And I thought to myself, you want to know horrifying? You want to know terrifying? You should have seen my son like I saw my son. So there's just, I think, such a disconnect. But anyway,
So Theresa, just remind everybody, how old were you when you had this
I
abortion?
was 17.
You were 17.
17, 18. I'm really, to tell you the truth, I
Right.
don't remember
So,
exactly, but it was,
now you said your father was forcing you. Where was your mother in this picture?
you know what, Janet, in those days, you know how the old Italians were, you know what, my mother
yeah,
did
what their
whatever.
father said.
That's right. You know, I mean, I found out many years later that my mother didn't want me to have the abortion, that she was actually trying to find alternatives. Much later on in my life, when we finally talked about it, because after the abortion I still was not accepted by my family for a while. It took quite a while before we ended up talking again. And even when I was accepted back into the family, it was like as if the abortion never happened. No one mentioned it, not a word. It was like the
Theresa,
monster in the room, you know.
Yeah. So when you left the hospital, who took you? Who
When
brought you to the hospital? And who took you home?
I still to this day do not have a clue how I got to the hospital. I really don't remember.
What about leaving the hospital, going home?
Leaving the hospital, I remember, isn't it funny? I can remember getting in the car, but I don't remember who drove me. I honestly don't. I think it was all so traumatic, probably.
But did you go to your parents' house?
No. It was 2 years before my father or anybody spoke to me. My mother used to sneak. So there I was. I caved into the pressure to have the abortion, right? Like, they make it sound like abortion's a free choice. How many, we know that very much it's not a free choice.
Right.
My mother used to sneak to see me and stuff, but she never, she wouldn't go against my father at the same time. Like I said, it's that old Italian, those relationships at that time. I had a sister that lived in California, and she ended up letting me come out there, and I stayed with her for 3 months. But I just remember that whole time of staying there, like I said, hating myself, not being able to relate to my nieces and nephews who I loved, but I couldn't even relate to them because I didn't know it at the time, but a lot of it was because it was so painful.
So you were 17, you were maybe a junior or senior in high school?
Yeah, well, I graduated at 17, so.
At 17, okay. Yeah. But how did this affect your whole education then? I guess you didn't even think about going on for college or anything.
I didn't. What ended up, well, I was 17, so when I finished high school, I was 17, I went to college, and then this happened, like, it's really hard, it's crazy to say, but I don't remember all the details, but it happened that fall. And it did disrupt my college. So I didn't have a college education. I ended up going back to school many years later.
Right.
But that was after I even had my kids, after I was married and I had my kids. So I just started this destructive life lifestyle like so many women do, with promiscuity and getting high and just hating myself and not thinking that I deserved anything. Ended up marrying somebody with a drug and alcohol problem, because you know what they say, you pick what you think you deserved, and I didn't think I deserved anything after what I did. I mean, certainly, you know, he said he loved me, but his actions didn't show anything like that. Went on to have 2 children with him, and but really turbulent marriage because of the addiction and everything, and ended up leaving him when my kids were very, very young. Um, and I often say, you know what, I left him because I didn't want them growing up in that. I think if I didn't have kids, I probably would have stayed in that relationship, because, you know, like I said, I didn't think I deserved anything better than the abuse that I was experiencing.
So
So,
now, how did you get from feeling such self-worth, I'm worth
right,
nothing, shame? How did you far over
right.
to getting healed? What led to that? And now, I mean, you're bringing so many others to healing. So tell us
Yeah.
about that transition.
Okay, so you know, like it always bothered me. That was one thing. You know, people say, "Oh, it's a curse that you saw your baby." To me, it wasn't. I think it was something that never really let me go deeply into denial. So I always knew it bothered me. I had never wanted it, so I was always looking for help. But there was no help out there. Everybody was like, "Oh, it's in your past. It's not this." You know how the denial is with post-abortion. And finally, when my older son was making his first communion, there was a meeting at the school, and I had stopped going to church. You know how that is. You know, you think you're damned for life. You're never going to step foot into a church again. But I wanted him to receive the sacrament, so he had a meeting for his first penance, and I went. And the priest started talking about the sacrament of reconciliation and God's forgiveness, and he started talking about, he mentioned abortion. And what ended up happening was, after that, I asked this priest if I could come and see him, because it was like the first flicker of hope that I had had. By now, it was like 15 years that I had been suffering. And I ended up seeing him, going to confession, and really developing a relationship with God, because I truly believe you cannot heal from an abortion unless you know God's love, because it's too hard to look there. It's too hard to go back and look at all the things you did, to look at the experience, if you don't know you're loved by God. Like that, knowing you're loved by God gives you the courage and strength to be able to face whatever it is that you're going to see, because you know that no matter what happens, He's going to love you. And that's really what happened to me. I ended up just growing in relationship with God, started going to daily mass, regular confession, adoration, and I ended up having a very spiritual healing where you know, this is the way I describe it. It's very inadequate, but one time I just kind of felt like I climbed on the cross with Christ. I was in so much pain because I suffered from depression, anxiety, like all the typical things that people that have had an abortion experience, you know, just the guilt, the shame. I would lock myself in my room. I remember I would feel bad because my kids would see me depressed all the time. So one night I just had this very spiritual experience where I feel like I climbed on the cross with Christ, only instead of feeling the pain, I felt a warm rush go through me. And I knew that He had touched me, that He had healed me. And ever
Right.
since then, like, just life changed after that drastically, because I just became on this quest to, you know, let others know that they didn't have to. I knew there had to be others. I knew I wasn't the only one. And I just
Right.
got on this quest to let other people know about God's mercy and His healing and His forgiveness. And so God, it's been amazing. It's really, you know, it's funny. I went for spiritual direction the other day, and my director said to me, you know something, you're a miracle. And you know what? He's right. I really am, because when I think of what I've gone through and where God has brought me, it is just like so amazing. And it's not like He's up there saying, "Oh, there's Teresa, I'm going to do it for her." He wants to do that for everyone that's experiencing this. This is what He wants
That's
to
right.
do, no matter who you are. And so
Exactly.
I just got that quest to just really set out on a journey.
Mhm.
And so I ended
And
up.
then,
Okay.
yeah, and I know you've had quite a few important people in your life that have kind of helped you along, and you established Lumina, which is your abortion recovery program. But I know there's been people like the Sisters of Life, Father
Right,
Benedict Rochelle,
right.
the CFRs, Father Marius Koch. I mean, you have been, when you say blessed, richly blessed
Yes, I
with,
have
I mean,
been.
like, you came back to the Mercy, but boy, oh boy, did you get surrounded like the A-list team of people
Did. I
who could
did.
help you, right?
Every day I thank God. Yeah, because what ended up happening is I started, well, I knew one of the original Sisters of Life before they were formed, but I had been writing to Cardinal O'Connor and just telling him, you need something, some more things need to be out there for people who have had an abortion. And he used to call me his post abortion haunt. He really did. It was crazy. But I did. I used to haunt him because I just didn't feel like there was enough out there. And he promised me when he started the Sisters of Life that one of the things they would do was minister to people who had had abortions. And so that's what really happened. Once the Sisters of Life were formed, a couple of the sisters and I began entering Canaan, which is the ministry. That's the name of the ministry that we do. And it's just grown over the years. I became very involved with the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, who also were brand new at that time when I met them. When I met the friars and Father Benedict, there was 8 of them. Now there's like 140. And they started working very closely. And so it began with the ministry for the women. And then after a period of time, a couple of the friars and I, Father Marius being one of them, we decided that it was just, we had some men that were in the ministry, but we just felt like they weren't being totally honest, and they were very protective of the women. And we just always felt like they were there for their own healing. We didn't want them to feel like they had to protect the women. We wanted them to get to their own stuff. And so we ended up starting a ministry just for the men. And we've been doing that now. It's probably close to 20 years at this point. And actually, we have a retreat on October 16th. So if anybody's interested, it's really great. Father Marius is the director. We have someone who gives his testimony. And we just found that it was so different when we separated the men, because they're so much more honest with each other when no women are around, and they just really open up a lot more. And it's just so beautiful. I mean, I always say this because it's just so, this really does describe it. Like, they come in like very hardened, very much so. But at the end of the day, like one time Father Marius said something like, at the end of the day, oftentimes you'll hear them sobbing in the chapel. And I just remember one time Father Marius saying to me, I don't know what else is going on in the world today, but nothing can beat what just happened here. And that's really the way that you feel, because men are so protected, and
Right.
just to be with each other and let those walls down and allow God's healing mercy to touch them. And it's just been beautiful.
Well, if they want to sign up or get more information for the retreat, they should go to enteringcanaan.org, right?
Right.
Entering, oh no,
Yeah,
.com.
they could go to either Entering Canaan, or they could go to Lumina too, postabortionhealth.org. Either one of those would, well, and there's a phone number if you want that. It's 877-586-4621. And they could register for the retreat. Yes, that's on
Right.
October 16th. And anyways, through doing the work and expanding the work, we just ended up it just kept growing, because I just kept seeing, well, I knew the impact it had in children just because of the impact it had on my own children. And Janet, you just see more and more how abortion
Right.
impacts people. It impacts women, it impacts men, it impacts children. And
Right.
so we ended up starting, it's 10 years. I can't believe it. It's 10 years this year. We began retreats for siblings of aborted babies. And I do that with one of the friars too. And one of the siblings that's been involved with me in the Entering Canaan ministry for like 16 years now. And he's great. So we have these weekends where people come from all over the country, and it's just been so beautiful to watch these siblings to share with each other, and to really know that they're not alone. And there's just so many aspects of that. Would my name be the same if that baby was born? There's so many different dynamics that go on for them. And so it's really
Right.
just such a grace for them to be able to be together and share and participate in this retreat and have that
Mhm.
healing. So we had one of those in March. So we really, we keep trying to reach out, and we do priest trainings and just all kinds of different things, because as you know as well as I do, for me, when I think about it, it should be part of RCIA. It should be part of anything that they're doing of
Mhm.
marriage preparation. Because how many times have you heard women say, I had an abortion but my husband doesn't know, and then maybe their
Absolutely.
relationship is strained,
And
right?
and, the, and people have to realize that an unhealed abortion going into a marriage,
Exactly.
I mean, that's going to affect the relationship with the husband and wife. It's going to affect future children when they're born. There's a whole dynamic there.
Yes,
And then
there is.
also, too, what you're bringing out with the siblings. I mean, when they find, first of all, most of these kids have a feeling someone's missing. They
Right.
know.
They say
They
that
know.
all the time.
All the time they say it. And it's almost like when they're finally told the truth, it's like an aha moment. I knew it. It's
Right.
almost like I knew. But now the other thing is, if it's not healed, if the family doesn't openly talk about it and seek healing together, then those children have to always wonder, oh, I could have been aborted.
Right.
Oh, but why did they choose me to live and not my brother or
Right.
sister?
A
Oh no.
tremendous guilt
And then
upon them
they
fail.
become like almost like overachievers, like where we have to always be measuring up for mom's love and mom's
Right.
love.
Right.
Because if she stops loving me, then maybe she'll get rid of me like she did my other siblings. So what parents have to understand, if you've had a prior abortion and you haven't found healing, but if you have found healing, you have got to be honest with your children. You've got to bring them into this
Age,
picture and
age
them too.
appropriate though. Age appropriate though,
Well,
because
of
I
course,
think,
age
yeah, because
appropriate.
some
Yeah.
people I know have done it when their kids were really young, and it's really, those kids shouldn't be burdened with that. It's got to be when they're
No,
old enough to be able to
no,
really
yeah,
recognize it.
it's age appropriate,
Yeah.
but at a certain point, they know.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, because
and
it does impact them, like you said. Even if they when they find out, it's like, oh my gosh. And so many of them carry it, and their parents don't even know they know. Like I've had
right,
kids that heard their parents on the phone, or found out in
right.
many other ways that their parents had had abortions. And then there's parents who say, well, I had an abortion, but it's none of my kids' business. They weren't even alive then. But it is their business.
It is their
It's their
business.
sibling.
In fact, Teresa, I think you're pretty familiar with Dr. Philip Ney, the Canadian psychiatrist,
Right.
and he had
That's right.
studied in his family practice for decades these abortion survivors. And one case in particular, I sometimes like to quote, I quoted it in my book, is that a woman came to him, family practice, with her little daughter, 6 years old, who was having a problem wetting the bed. And here he's talking to the mom. His assistant has the little girl off in another room. And you know what they do with kids when they're waiting for mom. The assistant says, oh, draw a picture of your family for us, okay? Now this girl was an only child. She draws a picture of mommy and daddy, herself, and two older siblings.
That weren't there. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now the assistant brings the picture into Dr. Ney, knowing, uh-oh, this is supposed to be an only child, but look what the kid drew. So she hands it to Dr. Ney. He looks at it and he says to the woman, he doesn't use the word abortion. He says, oh, that's interesting. Could you tell me about your pregnancies?
Yeah.
And she puts her head down and starts to cry. And she whispers in a very low voice and says, I had 2 abortions.
Yeah.
And then he shows her the picture that her daughter just drew,
And
and
was
she
it
goes,
just something that was an instinct with the daughter, or had she overheard something? Do you know?
no, it was something she had never heard anything from the mother. She never no. And so, of course, then Dr. Ney, through the therapy, family therapy, they came to see him every week for several months,
Right.
and the secret was finally let out.
Right.
The mother was able, with a therapist there, to properly talk to her daughter, and within months, the bedwetting, the nightmare stopped, everything stopped, and she just there was such a healing in the family.
This is such a huge wound for our country, and people don't even realize it. When you think about it, right? What is it, 62, 63 million abortions in our country now? And when you think
Right.
about the losses for the siblings, because it could be, maybe the mother had an abortion when she was a teenager, like I did. Maybe then she got into college, she had another abortion. Maybe the father had gotten a girlfriend pregnant and they had an abortion. So some of these kids have multiple siblings that they have lost through abortion. And like you said, it impacts the relationships, it impacts everything. And especially, and it's so conflicting for them because there's a part of them that wants to protect their parents, especially if they do know and they know their mother is suffering, or their father is suffering. They don't want to make them more upset. Or so it's affecting them on so many different levels, and it's so crucial for them to be able to talk about that in a safe environment and to be with other people. And I don't know, those weekends, I absolutely love them because you just see things unfolding. I mean, I hear from the siblings all the time. They're just like so grateful to have come to that, and they keep in touch with each other. And it's just really a beautiful experience to have them validate their feelings, to give them the worth of their own dignity in life, to let them know that even though that happened to a sibling, they're part of God's plan and their lives are valuable. Because like you said, so many of them think, why am I alive and my sibling is not? So it's a really, really beautiful weekend, and so needed. It is so needed across our country. It really is, because there's so many people impacted.
Well, Teresa, I'm going to pray that not only do you have one siblings retreat a year, that you have multiple ones
Yeah, that
throughout the
would be
year,
great,
that you
right?
get enough support, that you get enough assistance, that you can have maybe, at least 5, 6, 7 retreats a
That
year.
would be
Because we
beautiful.
know there's so many siblings out there hurting. So I just want to remind everyone, of course, we're so grateful for Theresa Bonapartis for sharing so honestly her story. But if you want more information, go to postabortionhelp.org. That's postabortionhelp.org. That's your portal into Theresa and all the different work that she's doing, how to find when's the next men's retreat coming up in October,
Right.
but all the other events and things that they have throughout the year, and the resources. I know you have a lot of great resources. And before we go, hold up, you have a beautiful book
Oh,
that you wrote
there.
about. Let's
They're
see the
actually
title.
they're meditations on healing. So they address specific issues that you would deal with in healing, like shame, the guilt, maybe like Mother's Day, things that would be triggers for you. So they're little meditations, and little quotes from Divine Mercy that help, in the healing
Healing.
process. Yeah,
And that book is called A Journey Through Divine Mercy
a journey
Healing.
to healing through Divine Mercy. Right.
A Journey Through Healing to Divine Mercy, available at marionpress.org. Marionpress.org. The great Marion Fathers up there in Stockbridge. So, Theresa, thank you again for joining me. All the blessings. And again, keep up the great work.
Thank
Okay?
you so much for having me, Janet. Thank you.
My pleasure. Well, brothers and sisters, thank you too for joining me. And just remember, there are many people out there hurting after an abortion. We're here to help. There's no such thing as an unforgivable sin. God's mercy is here for you. Thank you for joining me today on Just Ask Janet, and God bless.